Okay, so I'm going to continue the topic and I'm going to discuss this time tumor and tumor-like conditions. The first entity that was described in the book is the group of benign tumors, then it is followed by the malignant tumors. For the benign, we have here hemangioma. Hemangioma is a tumor of vascular origin. It may be cavernous or it may be capillary type. Cavernous means it is composed of large endothelial-lined vascular spaces. And from the term capillary, this type of hemangioma this time is made up of small caliber vessels. It can be that you will see both in the same lesion or mass, and this is what you call as a mixed type of hemangioma. Among children, these are mostly located in the skin, particularly in the face and the scalp. They produce flat to elevated, irregular, red-blue masses. Some are flat with larger lesions and are referred to as port wine stain. Port wine stain is a special form of nevus flammeus, which tends to grow during childhood, thicken the skin surface, and do not fade over time. Such lesion is usually in the distribution of the trigeminal nerve, and it is associated with Sturge-Weber syndrome. It is also associated with facial port wine nevus, ipsilateral venous angiomas, following the distribution of the trigeminal nerve, and also angiomas in the cortical leptomeninges. Some patients would usually present with mental retardation, seizures, hemiplegia, and skull opacities. The next would be the counterpart of hemangioma, this time occurring in the lymphatic channels, and that is what we call as lymphangioma. They are usually characteristically cystic cavernous spaces. The lesions may occur in the skin, but they are often encountered in the regions of the neck, axilla, mediastinum, retroperitoneal tissues. They are benign. They tend to increase in size after birth. This is owing to the accumulation of fluid. Lymphangiectasis is usually presenting as a diffuse swelling of a part or all of an extremity. There is considerable distortion and deformation which may occur as a consequence of spongy dilated subcutaneous and deeper lymphatics. The lesion is not progressive and it does not extend beyond its original location. However, the problem, of course, is the cosmetic appearance, and it is often difficult to correct it surgically. So this is an example of a patient with lymphangioma. This is more likely a patient with Turner syndrome if you are going to do chromosomal analysis. That is the classic location of cystic hygroma, that's the other term, and this is the classic appearance of cavernous type of lymphangioma. For fibrous tumor, they occur in infants and children, and they range from sparsely cellular proliferation of spindle-shaped cells, which is designated as fibromatosis, to richly cellular lesion, indistinguishable from fibrosarcoma occurring in adults. When this happens, this is what is referred to as congenital infantile fibrosarcoma. This congenital infantile fibrosarcoma do have a characteristic translocation, which results in generation of ETV6 and TRK3 fusion transcript. The normal ETV6 gene product is a transcription factor, while the NTRK3 gene product is a tyrosine kinase. Like other tyrosine kinase fusion proteins found in human neoplasm, ETV6 TRKC is constitutively active and simulates signaling through the oncogenic RAS and the P13K-AKT pathways. Among soft tissue tumors, the ATV6 and TRK3 fusion transcript is unique to infantile fibrosarcoma, making it a useful diagnostic marker. I have added an example of a patient diagnosed with such disease. As you can see, it occurred in the extremities, and the tumor is basically very large. It may end up with, of course, amputation of the limbs. And this is the characteristic spindle-shaped cells, very cellular, infiltrative pattern that is diagnostic of the malignancy. Now, this is a special stain in which you can actually detect the fusion transcript that I was telling you about a while ago. Now, let us go to teratomas. Teratomas may occur as benign, which are usually well-differentiated cystic lesions. They have an intermediate category, which may have a potential, an indeterminate potential as to prognosis and its course, or an unequivocally malignant teratoma, which is usually admixed with another germ cell tumor. Usually the mixture is that of an endodermal sinus tumor. They exhibit two peaks in incidence. The first is at approximately 2 years of age, and the second is late adolescence or early adulthood. The first peak is congenital neoplasm. The later occurring lesions may also be of prenatal origin, but are more slow-growing. Sacrococcygeal teratomas are the most common teratomas of childhood, accounting for 40% or more of the cases. They occur with the frequency of 1 in 20,000 to 40,000 live births. Approximately 10% of sacrococcygeal teratomas are associated with congenital anomalies, primarily defects in the hindgut and cloacal region, and other midline defects like meningocele and spina bifida. 75% of these tumors are mature teratomas, and about 12% are unequivocally malignant and lethal. The remainder is immature teratoma. Their malignant potential correlates with the amount of immature tissues, usually immature neuroepithelial elements that are present. Most of the benign teratomas are encountered in younger infants, less than 4 months, whereas children with malignant lesions tends to be somewhat older. Now, let's go now to the malignant category. So in here, these are the different types of malignant tumors, which are actually tabulated depending on the developmental stage. So as I've said, 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14. So it gives you an idea of what are the usual cancers of infancy and childhood. The main differences, some of which have already been mentioned, include the following. So you must take note of the incidence, the type of tumor, the frequent demonstration of close relationship between abnormal development, teratogenesis, and tumor induction, oncogenesis, some of which will give you an underlying familial or genetic predisposition. There is a tendency of fetal and neonatal malignancies to regress or differentiate spontaneously. There is an improved survival or cure of many childhood tumors, so that more attention is now being devoted to minimizing the adverse delayed effects of chemo and radiotherapy in survivors. So, first on the list that was emphasized in your book is the neuroblastic group, particularly neuroblastoma. When we talk of neuroblastoma, one of the things that you should remember is the ALK gene, anaplastic lymphoma kinase gene. So when neuroblastomas, most neuroblastomas will occur sporadically, but 1 to 2% of which are familial. And in such cases, the neoplasms may involve both the adrenal or multiple primary autonomic site. Germline mutations in the anaplastic lymphoma kinase gene have recently been identified as a major cause of familial predisposition to neuroblastoma. Somatic gain of function ALK mutations are also observed in less than 10% of sporadic neuroblastoma. Tumors harboring ALK mutations in either the germline or somatic testing may be amenable to treatment. So the site could be sympathetic ganglia, adrenal medulla, which is regarded as the most common. So when we take sections of the mass, they are composed of small cells embedded in a finely fibrillar matrix. In childhood, about 40% of neuroblastoma will arise in the adrenal medulla. The remainder will occur anywhere along the sympathetic chain, and the most common location being the paravertebral region of the abdomen and the posterior mediastinum. It may arise in other sites like the pelvis, the neck, the brain. Neuroblastomas can range from minute nodules to large masses of more than 1 kilogram in weight. So as you can see here, histologically, you are having small primitive appearing cells with dark nuclei, scant cytoplasm, and poorly defined cell borders, which is growing in solid sheets. However, it is also important to recognize the rosettes. Typically, the rosettes is what we call as the Homer-Wright's pseudorosettes. It can be found in which the tumor cells are concentrically arranged around a central space filled with neuropil. So other features that you can use to identify the mass or further confirm it is employing immunohistochemical stain. Particularly, neuron-specific annulase is a very good marker to be used. And also ultrastructural demonstration of small membrane-bound cytoplasmic catecholamine-containing secretory granules via electron microscopy may also be useful. The maturation of neuroblast into ganglion cells is usually accompanied by the appearance of Schwann cells. The presence of Schwann cells composed of organized fascicles of neuritic process, mature Schwann cells, and fibroblasts is a histologic prerequisite for the designation of ganglioneuroblastoma or ganglioneuroma. I am showing you now an example of ganglioneuroma. It is arising from spontaneous or therapy-induced maturation of neuroblastoma. They are characterized by clusters of large cells with vesicular nuclei and abundant eosinophilic cytoplasm, representing neoplastic ganglion cells. Spindle cells, which are actually Schwann cells, may also be present in the background stroma. So in your book, there are two tables there that you should try to review, because basically it gives you the different prognostic parameters that may help you when you talk to your patient. In addition, that table contains the staging so that you will be able to stage your patient as stage 1 to stage 4, depending on the findings, like for example, the age of your patient, the evidence of metastasis. Now, catecholamines, 90% of neuroblastomas, regardless of location, will produce catecholamines, similar to the catecholamines associated with pheochromocytoma. It is an important diagnostic feature. You can assay the blood levels of catecholamines and elevated urine levels of the metabolites, particularly vanillmandelic acid. They sometimes call it the blueberry muffin baby. The The neonates with disseminated neuroblastoma may present with multiple cutaneous metastases. And this multiple cutaneous metastasis may cause deep blue discoloration of the skin. Hence, the term is blueberry muffin baby. So again, as I have mentioned, do not forget or do not fail to check on that. There are two tables in your book, which is very important in the assessment of the prognostic factors and also the staging of your patient. The stage are very important determinants in the prognostication of your patient. So this is one of the table that I am trying to emphasize. As you can see, the parameters are on the first column, and the second and the third column enumerates whether that parameter will give you a favorable or an unfavorable prognosis. The Wilms tumor is the last that is described in your book. It is a primary renal tumor. The peak incidence is 2 to 5 years of age. It is usually diagnosed before the age of 10. The bilaterality rate is around 5 to 10%. It may be occurring at the same time, or it may be occurring one after the other. So that's synchronous or metachronous. The gene that is involved is what you call as the WT1, which encodes a DNA binding transcription factor. WT1 has multiple binding partners, which affects whether it will function as a transcriptional activator or repressor. About 10% will have gain of function mutation in the genes encoding for beta-catenin. It is under Wilms, you actually have 3 syndromic tumors. First is WAGR, which stands for Wilms tumor, aneurysm, genital anomalies, and the R for retardation, mental retardation. The next would be your Dennis-Drash syndrome, which is characteristically presenting with gonadal dysgenesis in the form of male pseudohermaphroditism and early onset of nephropathy, presenting as diffuse mesangial sclerosis. And the last would be your Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, in which the presentation would be more of organomegaly, macroglossia, hemihypertrophy, omphalocele, and adrenal cytomegaly. So these syndromic tumors are expected to develop more likely Wilms. Now, in addition, WAGR is the particular locus of involvement would be your chromosome 11. The two-hit theory hypothesis is what is involved in the pathogenesis. Next would be your Dennis-Drash. Dennis-Drash is an example of germline abnormalities again in WT1, while Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome is usually transcriptional silencing involving your chromosome 11. So the mass is often well circumscribed. When you look at it histologically, the characteristic triphasic appearance is evident. The triphasic will be composed of your small round blue cells, which is then corresponding to the blastemal component. If you see immature tubules, these are the epithelial component. And of course, the stromal component are usually fibrillary or fibrillary or fibromyxoid. That's the stromal component. So take note that you have 3, that's the blastemal, epithelial, and the stromal. The importance of identification of the nephrogenic rest when this is present within the tumor is that it should warrant close follow-up by the surgeon. This is because it usually connotes that the chance of having another Wilms tumor on the other kidney is there if you see this nephrogenic rest. So it entails close follow-up. So I think that ends my discussion. Please read your book. I will release the recording in Moodle. And in addition, the PowerPoint will also be released. So good luck in your examinations and hope you have a fine day ahead. Thank you very much again for your kind attention.